Hey everybody, welcome to this quick cybersecurity webinar. Appreciate you watching. I am here with Ken Kizzee, who is the Director of IT Security for Parachute, which is an MSP in the Bay Area, California. And Ken is a cybersecurity expert who has been in the space in one form or fashion for 30 years now. And Ken, can you give us a little bit of background on more of your experience and yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andrew. I'm getting old, 30 years. So I started originally on the help desk doing PC support, Novell environment, IPX, SPX, and went from PC support to networking and systems, and then into engineering, and then consulting, and then management. And sometime around 2006, I started specializing in cybersecurity and compliance. But yeah, I've worked my way up, and I've got the scraped knuckles. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, cool. I appreciate you sharing. And I know earlier you told me you have you have a passion for bringing enterprise level security and compliance to SMBs, right? And prior to hitting record, what we were talking about is the some of the struggles that SMBs have, right? Because they don't want to overspend, they don't want to underspend, and there's not great education for them to figure out what it is they need to do. It feels a bit like a black box to them.
You don't know what you don't know, and
Right.
it's expensive, right? And that's where my passion comes from. So oftentimes what happens is small businesses, they don't go far enough, or they don't do anything at all. Analysis paralysis, they don't know what to do. They don't want to spend too much money, or what they do implement isn't really cohesive, and it's easy to get around because they cherry pick what they want to implement rather than coming in with a cohesive security strategy based upon their risk appetite.
Mm-hmm.
That's where my passion comes from. So bringing that enterprise quality insight to the SMB space at a cost point that they can afford, but also knowing what to do first, what to do second, and what's most important based upon their business.
Got it. And I mean, cybersecurity has just exploded. Cybersecurity, right, and cyber threats have really exploded in recent years. I feel like every week I'm seeing another headline about some major, company being hacked and data being exploited. So what are some of the key trends that you're seeing in 2021 and going into 2022?
There's two big major categories. One would be the supply side or supply chain attacks, and the other one would be ransomware, right? So the supply side, supply chain, that's going to be all your third parties, your vendors that have access to either your infrastructure or your data. If you pay attention to your infrastructure and your data, and you secure it, and you make sure it's compliant, then as a hacker, I won't target you because you're not the path of least resistance. Maybe one of your vendors that has that access or has the data would be a easier target to penetrate. So that's the supply side, the supply chain attacks, and that's really getting to be pretty big.
What do you do about supply side vulnerability?
Well, let me give you a couple of examples first of all before we get into so everybody knows what we're talking about. The Kaseya RMM vulnerability, right? That was a supply side attack trying to get into environments. The monitoring software, SolarWinds. Well, I
Yep.
almost forgot the name of that. That's a third party that you use to monitor your environment. So by default, you have to give it access, and that was recently attacked, right? So the way to combat that, the supply side attack chain, is twofold. One is to monitor. You want to monitor everything, log it and monitor for anomalous activity, right? Have it run through a SIM tool looking for exploits that are in the wild that matches the pattern that it finds. And the other thing that you want to do is you want to manage your vendors closely. Have some sort of a risk appetite set up for vendors based upon the access level that you give them to your infrastructure and data. Require them to be compliant with your own internal policies, if nothing else, and then manage them year over year to make sure that they stay that way.
And that's got to be kind of tough, right? Because especially as an SMB, if you're pushing back on a vendor, you might not have enough leverage, right, to necessarily say, hey, you need to do this. So I imagine that puts some SMBs in pretty precarious situations if they're finally, maybe they're taking cybersecurity very seriously for the first time and recognizing that, one of their vendors is not up to snuff. I imagine that's a tough conversation to have sometimes.
It is. But you'll find that if you've got the right vendor and they're willing to partner with you, and it's profitable for both companies to continue to do so, most third parties are willing to work with you. And a lot of companies are going after compliance. We were just talking about this, the SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. That's a good way of negating that whole conversation. Just find a vendor that is compliant with something that is like a SOC 2, where they follow a trust model, or an ISO 27001 compliance, right? And just manage them maintaining that compliance.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I wanna touch on that a little bit later in our conversation. So in terms of key trends, so supply chain attacks, and then ransomware is the kind of second part of that, right? So can you break that down a little bit for me?
Yeah, so I'm sure everybody's heard about all the ransomware attacks, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It happens a lot of different ways. What I like to discuss with ransomware is how to make it not happen. Because it's not all that hard, honestly. It's vulnerability management. You have to check your environment, your systems in your environment, to make sure that they're not vulnerable to exploits that are in the wild or out on the internet being used by hackers. Then you also need to check your people, your employees, your contractors, to make sure that they are also trained and that they're aware. You have to turn your employees and contractors into human firewalls, so that they think before they click, and they run all that training through their head before they send anything off, so that they become as secure as your firewall, right? Go ahead.
Are things moving fast enough that that type of awareness training, is that something that should be done monthly, quarterly, annually? Because it just seems like cyber attacks and things are moving so fast right now, right? So how often should a company do that?
At least annually. And so you should fish yourself. Okay. You set up security awareness training. First thing you do is you train your employees and contractors how not to become fish bait. And then you test yourself by fishing yourself. And then you apply remedial training where necessary. But you should at least do it on an annual basis. Every company should.
Got it. Okay. And so security awareness training is part one of vulnerability management. And then the technology side, scanning your systems, right? Not just specific pieces of it, but
right. Because it's the system as a whole that can be attacked, right? So if you're just looking at the one piece and you're not looking at the other piece, if you're just looking at the software and not the hardware, if you're just looking at the network and you're not looking at the applications, if you're not looking at your desktops, you're only looking at your servers and your network, then you're missing a big piece from your desktops, because that's where the users interact with everything. So you really need to scan everything as a system, and you evaluate that system as it compares to the exploits that are in the wild that hackers are using. And you patch, or you fix, you update, you upgrade, you isolate, you segment, you do what you need to do to not be vulnerable.
And going back to what we were talking about earlier with its, not knowing what to do, what to implement, how to not spend too much or too little. As a CFO or CEO who wants to start to take this seriously, let's say I'm bought in. So what do you do with this information? Where do you kind of go with this?
This goes back to the vendor management that we were just discussing. Find a partner. Find a partner that you can trust. Look for a SOC 2 compliant partner, or an ISO compliant partner, and start with an assessment. Address your risk appetite with this partner. It's important that you become honest with your partner, right? Let them know what your true risk appetite is. Discuss what the impact of a cybersecurity incident would have on your business in truth, right? And walk through that. And then you perform an assessment, and you come up with a roadmap or a gap assessment, a punch list of things that need to do that you can then prioritize and budget for, right? And so you're addressing your risk in a formal and managed way with foresight. That would be my answer.
Okay. And you've mentioned a couple different certifications so far. Are one of those kind of the ideal one? Is there one that is if we had to choose between a vendor that has one certification or the other, we should choose one or the other?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say that would be the SOC 2 Type 2. And I'm going to read off the screen so that I don't get it wrong.
Sure.
But that's because they're based on the trust principles. So it's the CIA of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, with processing integrity added in, as well as privacy. And
Got
actually,
it. Okay.
I just did that off the top of my head too. So
There you go. And so if let's say I'm in a SOC 2 desert, right? And so I want a local vendor, right? Because maybe I want someone who can come on site once in a while, or consistently. If I can't find SOC 2, then it's ISO, was it the 27001?
27,001. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a good alternative.
Yeah. And it's a good, well-rounded compliance. It covers building a security program. It covers a lot of the different security controls and compliance controls that you'll need to have in place to be a reputable vendor. The catch to this is the two part of the SOC 2. Okay, the SOC 2 type 2. The type 2 means that it recurs annually. So when you have a type 2, that means that you have a third party coming in and assessing your environment year over year. If you have a 27001 or a SOC 2 type 1, that's a point in time assessment. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that, yes, they meet a certain criteria, but that they also continue to meet it year over year. So if it is an ISO 27001 type of certification, you want to manage that vendor to make sure that they have a third party come in at least periodically, and provide what's called an AOC, or attestation of compliance, that they are still compliant.
Got it. Okay. Cool. I think we've covered some good things here. Is there anything else you want to leave the audience with?
Patch early and often. Seriously, vulnerability management, I think, is the key to cybersecurity. Now, this includes the people as well, right? But if you're not vulnerable, then you can't be attacked. Nothing is ever 100%. Nothing's foolproof, right? If you want to secure your data, don't have it on the network.
Sure. And also, the term you used earlier is as a hacker, you want to find the path of least resistance, right? And so if you're making it difficult for them, maybe there is a way in, right? In fact, there is some, but if you're making it difficult and someone else is making it a lot easier, they're just going to walk by. It's like having I used to work in home security. And just by having a home security sign in your front yard, you reduce the chance of getting broken into by 30%, simply because they don't want to hassle with the security system. So they're just going to move on to the next one.
Right. You're a hardened target.
Exactly. Okay, great. I really appreciate your time, Ken. And with that, I will let you go. Thanks everyone for joining us.